Welcome to the Ring General Boxing Podcast with myself, George Zaka, here in Perth, Western Australia. And we're joined from the Philippines by the Ring General himself, Rick Staley, the man who trained Manny Pacquiao to win his first WBC World Championship.
Well, 22nd of February, Rick, at the MGM Grand Las Vegas, Tyson Fury stops Deontay Wilder in the 7th round of what I thought was a pretty brutal beatdown and pretty exciting. I didn't expect Fury to go through with what he was saying pre-fight, basically. What did you think about that?
Well, I learned one thing. Listen to what he says because he's one of those guys that he doesn't bullshit. He comes out and says, listen, I think the first time he said he was going to give him a boxing lesson, which he kind of did. He got caught a couple of times, but if you look at that fight, probably won 8 rounds to 4.
Yep.
Could have won the fight. He ended up getting a draw. This time he came out and he said he's going to go for the knockout, and you're like, well, I don't know if that's the smartest strategy, fighting fire with fire, but because I felt that he could easily outbox him. I thought that, he's going to, if he just boxes him, he's probably not going to get caught to the point where he gets knocked out, and he probably wins the decision. But boy, I tell you, he came out, he looked fabulous. It was sort of competitive for about 2 rounds, and then once he knocked him down in the 3rd, that was basically the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
It looks like he caught him in the back of the head, and whether it really affected him or not, it didn't matter. It was just a matter of time before he was going to stop him.
And I remember chatting to you before the fight. You thought Fury pulled a little bit of Andy Ruiz, not wearing wearing a T-shirt at the weigh-in and coming in a bit heavy.
The lead up, I told everybody, I said, look, I think Fury wins the decision. I think he wins the fight. And then when he was heavy, I started thinking about the wrestling because he was doing a lot of that WWE stuff in the States. And I'm like, is he too concerned about that? Hasn't been going to the gym, but he actually he came out after the fight and said, no, the intention was to come in heavier because he was looking for the knockout. And he never looks great anyway. It's like it's not like he's got that nice body that like a Holyfield or one of those guys. But I thought maybe I said you never know with the heavyweights because they don't have to make the weight. So it's unless you've got somebody on the inside that says, listen, he's trained really hard for this. He's in great shape. You kind of don't know. With Andy, you kind of knew that the word was out that he probably wasn't training hard and he had a lot of distractions. With Tyson Fury, you saw the distractions as far as the wrestling, but did he sit back and say, okay, I'm going to take 6 or 8 weeks and dedicate it to boxing, which it looks like he obviously did. Purposely came in heavier, and I was a little bit fooled by that at the last minute. But I tell you, he looked sensational. Got to give Deontay credit too because he wasn't going to quit.
Yeah,
that guy was just he was having a really bad night, and he just kept saying, you know what, I'm going down on my shield.
Yep.
He didn't quit.
And I thought it was impressive also what Deontay Wilder did out there, but I thought it was a little bit average what he said after the fight with the whole suit controversy. I mean, I think if you had planned to wear the suit and you put it on before the fight and it feels horrible, just take it off and walk out without a bloody suit on. What did you think about all that?
Well, for me, he broke rule number 1 in boxing. I always tell everybody, my fighters, I said, look, never go into the ring with anything that you haven't worn before.
Yeah, I remember you telling me.
I'm sure he tried it on to make sure it fit, but he didn't really wear it around. I've seen the boxers where they go and they get the sponsors with the shoes.
Mm-hmm.
They put those shoes on the night of the fight, which is that is not a good thing. And I can cite cases where they've had problems with their feet. But I'm talking even your jock strap. You don't put anything on that you have never worn before. Socks, you name it. Don't go out and grab a brand new pair of socks. Make sure you've worn them before. The only thing that you should have that's new is the tape on your hands and what they tape your gloves up with, and of course, new gloves that they're going to give you. But everything else that you have on your body, you should definitely have worn before. I hate when boxers make excuses, and I tell you, in sports, they're probably the best ones at making excuses. You put them against any other sportsman, the boxers can come up with some really good excuses why they lost the fight. But I will say that it probably did affect them. I
Yeah.
mean, you're looking at 40, I guess it was about, 45 pounds, and then I don't know if that included the helmet or not. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I'll give you a story. Years ago, I used to run when I was in the military with a friend of mine that was very fit. I mean, he looked great. And we used to run out at Clark, and we used to do 7 miles, maybe 3 times a week. And I always beat him, and I beat him pretty easy. I was a pretty good long-distance runner. And then one day I said, okay, well, I said, to make it fair, I'll put on those weights, those ankle weights. And I think, I don't know, they were 5, 7.5 pounds, whatever they were. And I tell you, I still beat him, but there was a big difference. I didn't beat him by a hell of a lot. And at the end of that run, I could definitely feel the difference.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I could see him, I could definitely see him. I do it, with my workouts. I'll go ahead and put, cotton on, and I'll put the plastic sweatsuit on in the heat. And boy, I tell you, spar with that stuff on, and it really affects you. I mean, it takes something out of you. So I think it did affect him. Probably would have raised my hand, because it doesn't look good for the team. You sit there and say, hey, my what did he call it? His uniform or his outfit? It makes the team look like a bunch of idiots for actually letting them go out there with that on, and not being able to, hey, look, can you handle this? And there was, you got to remember, there was some unusual delays there too. So he sat around longer than he normally would have. He figured he was going to put it on, walk in, and be done. And the next thing you know, we're watching videos of him in the locker room, standing there with his armor on. 45 minutes later, he takes the walk, or whatever it was. I don't know how long it was, but there was definitely a delay.
Yeah.
But you can't take anything away from Tyson. He fought the fight that he wanted to fight, and it was just a matter of time before he was going to stop him.
Yeah.
I was watching it with a few guys. I think Chris Daly. I don't know. It was hard to see that. I think one of the corner. You could see in the corner the round before they wanted to stop the fight, and I mean the way they were talking to him, I got the impression that they wanted to pull the plug, and Deontay didn't want that. And then apparently Mark Breland, or one of them, said, I think Mark Breland ended up, stepping up on the apron and saying, look, he's had enough. But it was hard to see. But great performance by Tyson. Just an absolute. Did you see the news today? I saw a headline this morning stating that Wilder's going to step aside, and or not Wilder. Wilder's going to step aside and let Fury fight maybe AJ or something. But
and I just never heard much from Wilder ever since the fight. His people have been very quiet. It's Fury that's been saying he wants the rematch the whole time.
Well, they had that exercise. They had a rematch clause, and it didn't take them long to come out and say, yes, I want that. And I think that the consensus in the boxing world was, a lot of people thought that he should just go out there and fight somebody else, let Fury fight AJ, and then get back in the mix afterwards. But he said no. He goes, I'm a warrior. I want that rematch immediately. Now, apparently, I didn't read the article because I was in a bit of a hurry this morning, but I saw the headline stating that he's going to actually step aside and let Fury fight, I'm assuming AJ or whoever. But it looks like he's going to be on the shelf there for a little bit.
Yeah, well, money-wise, it makes sense for Fury to go Wilder again, because if he wins that fight, then there's good money for AJ. But if he beats AJ, I don't think it's as lucrative going back in there with Wilder. What do you think?
Well, I mean, if I'm handling Wilder, I'd probably say, look, if we take this next fight, it's going to be difficult. And if you watch the first round, he was actually trying to box him. He wasn't trying to go crazy. And it looked like he was trying to be prudent in his, his style. But it's one of those things where it's going to be tough to beat him. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought if they had another rematch, I thought Fury would beat him in a decision. I don't think he would knock him out. I think Wilder would probably last the 12 rounds, but he probably wouldn't win the fight. But maybe if he gives him a little bit of a break, if he comes in there and he fights somebody else and he works on his craft a little bit more, maybe he's got a better chance. Plus, I guarantee that step-aside money is pretty nice.
Yep.
I mean, I'm guessing it's got to be, it's definitely seven figures. I mean, is it $4 or $5 million? I don't know, but it's not going to be chump change.
Yep.
So I don't know. I actually think that this is a good move on Wilder's part because I think if he goes in there and Fury is serious, I think Fury beats him again. I don't know if he stops him, but I definitely think he's got the skill set to beat him again. I thought he won the first fight. He easily won the second fight. They ironed a few things out, okay, but I still don't think it's good enough to beat him. I think he's got to catch him. And I was saying after the first one, I said, look, the next time he fights somebody and he doesn't knock him out, he's going to lose. I mean, if you look at what he's done in his last 12 rounds against Ortiz, two judges gave Ortiz 5 out of the 6 rounds.
Yep.
And two judges in this fight gave not Wilder, but Fury 5 out of 6 rounds. So if you look at him, he's lost 10 out of the last 12 rounds that he's actually boxed. And he caught Ortiz in the 7th, but that to me, I thought he looked terrible. I actually thought he looked terrible. I mean, you don't let the 40-year-old guy. I mean, you always talk about taking guys into deep water in boxing. Well, guess what the 40-year-old does? He takes you into shallow water. He goes the opposite. He sits out there and he kind of feints a little bit. And he moves a little bit. He's a little bit awkward as a southpaw, but he's not super tricky. He's not super slick. And the next thing you know, they're throwing 30 punches around. I mean, if I'm in the corner of Wilder, I said, look, I know you got a bomb in your right hand, but at the end of the day, you got to throw punches. You got to make this maybe 45-year-old guy work, maybe 42, whatever he is, but he's in his 40s, and you can't let him just sit there and look at him and throw 30 punches around. If you look at the punch stats of both of those fighters in that they were virtually the same. They both threw about 30 punches around. You got to make that old guy work. And he wasn't. And then at the end, he's like, look, doesn't matter. I've got the power. The guys have fallen in love with that power. Someday they're not going to knock somebody out. And the next time he did knock somebody out, he got beat. I didn't expect him to get knocked out. But, he had a real bad night. But you got to give all the credit to Tyson Fury. I mean, he fought a great fight. He was aggressive, and you could see where he was starting to get a little bit tired. But I said, you know what? I still think he's going to have enough. And if he does run out of gas, he has declawed, defanged Wilder. There's going to be nothing left. Even if he totally runs out of gas in 8 rounds, all he's got to do is walk around the last 4 rounds, and he's going to win the fight because Wilder has 0 left. He would have left him with no weapons.
Yeah.
That's how bad he was. Like you said, he was giving him a serious beatdown.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for Fury, so you think because AJ was going to jump in there with the Bulgarian guy. What's his name?
Yeah. I know who you're talking about. The one that fought.
I totally lost.
Kulev? Is it Kulev?
Yes. But that obviously Corona postponed that. Is there have you got any gossip on any fights coming up, Rick?
Actually, I don't. I actually thought when the smoke cleared, I was pretty sure that Eddie was going to take AJ into the direction of Kulev, pick up that belt, and then say, okay, now we can do the big 3 or the big 4, throw Andy Ruiz in there. I mean, for me, Andy's kind of a non-player now because of what he did the last fight, and he's got a lot of money.
Yeah.
If you see an Andy Ruiz sighting, I mean, the guy might weigh 400 pounds. You just don't know.
Yeah.
You just don't know. So, but yeah, I actually thought that the way Eddie was talking, he was kind of giving hints that they couldn't get out of the fight, and he probably could have, but he didn't want to. Probably said, hey, look, let's have AJ fight Pulev, let him pick up that title, and then we've got a little bit more clout when we fight either Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury. So, yeah, this whole situation has really put, I mean, not only boxing, but pretty much every sport on the back foot. I know you guys, I think that you guys are playing the AFL down in Australia, right? The empty stadium?
They haven't been. I haven't been watching TV, so I'm not 100% sure, but I'm under the impression they're trying to make all the players take flu vaccines and things like that. And with the AFL and in the rugby, and some of the players don't want to take the vaccines. It's all, I think it's all still up in the air a little bit, but they're talking about trying to bring it back.
Well, I was, the season started a couple of months ago, I believe, the AFL. And I was actually in a hotel, and they had the TV on, and an Australian friend of mine said, they just started the season, and they're playing the games. I don't think there was, if I remember correctly, there wasn't anybody in the stands. So I don't know if they continued that or not. I've kind of lost track of everything.
I think they stopped it, Rick. I think they're talking about, I think they'll still be playing in empty stadiums when it starts up again, but the main controversy is with whether they're going to be taking these vaccines, which aren't even corona vaccines, they're just flu vaccines. But it feels like it might be a bit of a token effort to look like they're doing something. What else was I going to say, Rick? I had something else for you there. The UFC the other day. Did you watch that one? I didn't, but that would have been interesting.
I sure did. I tell you, I always tell people, I love Tony Ferguson, one of my favorite fighters, but he had won 12 straight. Don't ever bet the guy in the 13th fight. I don't care if it's boxing or whatever. You're undefeated, 12-0. You're a two-time Olympic champion. On that 13th fight, you go out and find a taxi driver, a tuk-tuk driver, a trike driver, somebody. You don't want the toughest guy in the block. And apparently, Tony actually made the weight for the original fight, and then he turned around and made the weight for this one. But man, that was a very good card and a brutal fight. I mean, with what he got hit with, most people would have been long gone. He's got a hell of a chin.
Yep.
And I thought it was a great stoppage by Herb Dean. He caught him with two jabs at the very end. You know, he caught him with one jab, wobbled him, then he hit him with another jab, and Herb stepped in and said, "That's it." But he was on, fumes at that point. He was in serious trouble, and it was just a matter of time before he was going to get seriously damaged. Yep. And who knows? He may not be the same after that fight because, man, he took a lot of punishment.
I'm interested to see what the pay-per-view would have been for that fight. The numbers, because you'd think it would be pretty decent with everyone stuck at home.
Yeah, you would think. It's funny, I heard a comment from a boxing person that was on the Facebook that said, well, they didn't, there was nobody at the live gate, so why make it pay-per-view? And I was thinking, well, I mean, who's going to pay for the show? I mean, at the end of the day, is the UFC, is Dana White Santa Claus? Where, hey, look, folks, you can't come to the fight, so we can't charge tickets. You know what? We're just going to make it free to watch it, too. So, yeah, you would think that the pay-per-view numbers would be good because you've got the captive audience. There's millions of people sitting home in between the fights with a wife. They said, hey, let's watch the pros do it. So you would think that, the numbers would be really good.
Okay, Rick. Well, since there's not too much else happening in the fight game, me and Billy thought we'd come up with a few mythical matchups for you. we got a bit of a list here, and the first one is your old fighter, Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao, against Roberto Duran at lightweight. Would you give us a bit of a idea as to what you think would have happened in some of these matchups and how they would have gone?
Well, I tell you, that's a great fight to start the list with, because that would be, I mean, maybe the best one on that whole list of, what is it, 16 fights that you've got?
Yeah.
I think that would be an absolute war. Tough one to pick. And really, if you look at lightweight, I think Manny only had one fight at lightweight against David Diaz.
Yep.
He looks really good, but David Diaz is not Roberto Duran. But I look at it this way. If you look at Manny's, where he was really dominating that period, where he was fighting at 147, he could have made 135 at that time too. So really,
Yep.
he was a lightweight, at that particular time. I'm gonna say it's an absolute war. It's a close. I think it goes the distance, and it's close. And I've got to give it to the Senator. And I know a lot of people would say, Duran would beat him. I mean, at the end of the day, but what people don't remember at lightweight, Duran, he lost to De Jesus. It's not like he was invincible. And both of the guys were kind of, they're a little bit raw if you watch their styles. But I just think it would have been an absolute fabulous fight. I think the crowd would have went crazy. They would have stood up at the end of 12 or 15 rounds, whatever they scheduled it for, and it would have been close. And I just think that Manny's speed and if you look at when he was really firing on all cylinders, and I've always said that Floyd Mayweather is going to always be a tough fight for him because of the style, but I can see why Floyd didn't go near him for about 4 or 5 years, because
Yep.
he was just absolutely destroying everybody, and and he was destroying bigger guys. I mean, not only just everybody, but these guys were bigger. And you go back and watch. I remember when Duran won the title against Ken Buchanan, I think in Madison Square Garden in New York. Ken was a hell of a fighter, but he was a true lightweight. I mean, Manny was going up to welterweight and just destroying guys.
Yep.
So I'm gonna give the edge to Senator Pacquiao.
Beautiful.
Slightly.
Just gonna say, Duran, I only really seen most of his fights at middleweight with all the 80s guys, Hagler and Leonard and that. Was he in there with many left-handers in his day?
I don't think he would have been. No.
Yeah.
I always remember. I can't remember him fighting the southpaw at those. And he was one of my favorite fighters. I mean, he was my favorite fighter until Sugar Ray Leonard came along after the '76 Olympics. I loved Roberto Duran, but those days there wasn't a lot of southpaws, and most guys kind of stayed away from him.
Yep.
I mean, Marvin Hagler was a great example. I mean, that's one southpaw you did not want to fight.
Was he, because he go both ways, was he naturally left-handed? I'm not 100% sure.
He was a southpaw that was
Okay.
pretty darn good at going orthodox and boxing. But if you notice when he did it, it was, it would have been 10 or 15% of the time. It wasn't a lot. I think he made a mistake against Sugar Ray Leonard those first 2 rounds. He actually stayed orthodox the whole 2 rounds. He probably should have came out as a lefty from the get-go.
Yeah, he was effective when he'd close the distance at a lefty, and then he'd go right-handed on the inside, just so you sort of kept you confused a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, he features in the next one, Rick. I always ask Billy, because he knows the middleweights of the 80s. I always ask him what he thinks would have happened if Triple G went back to the 80s and got in there with these guys, because I love Triple G, but I just feel as though he wouldn't really be able to kick it with those guys. Would you let us know what you think would happen if Triple G got in there with Marvelous Marvin?
I tell you, it's tough to back anybody against Marvin Hagler. I met him in 1993 at the WBC convention in Las Vegas, and he's not a big guy. Actually, I met him before that. I met him in Manila. He came out to Manila after he lost to Duran. There was a world title fight. Rolando Bojo won a world title in Manila, and Marvin came out to the Philippines. So that's the first time I met him, and then years later I met him a few years later in Las Vegas. You know what? As hard as Triple G hits, I don't think he hurts. I don't think he hurts Hagler, and you got to remember, Marvin was a pretty good boxer too. I mean, he didn't get credit for it because he punched well, but at the end of the day, he was a very handy boxer, and I agree with you. I think Triple G is a very, very good fighter, but if you look at his era, he really hasn't fought a lot of good guys. And Canelo's going to go down as a great fighter when his career is all said and done. But at the end of the day, at 160 pounds, Canelo has a hard time with these legends.
Yeah.
I don't see him beating. Hagler at 160. I don't see him beating a lot of these guys at 160 pounds. But yeah, I've got to agree with you. I think Marvin wins this fight.
Beautiful. The next one is a fun one, Rick. Me and Billy agree. We think a Prime Tour would beat a Prime Tyson. How do you think Prime Tyson, Prime Tour goes?
That's a tough one too. I'm gonna have to favor Tyson.
Okay.
I look at. For me, they're almost like they're clones of each other. If you look at, that's another one where they just stand there and if you're a left hook fan like I am, boy, you're in for a serious treat. Where I can just see these guys getting inside and just throwing lots of bombs. I just think that Mike's speed and his head movement when he was in his prime, I think that wins him the fight. I don't think that David would outbox him. I just think that Mike's speed and power, or not power, but his when he was in his prime, that the head movement was incredible, and the speed where he would come up with a lot of short punches, but they were punches in bunches, and they were really fast. And I give him the edge. Probably goes the distance. I don't see him. David had a heck of a chin. So I don't see Mike knocking him out, but I do see Mike doing enough to win the fight.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember when I first asked Billy, I'm going for Mike in the fight, but I think Tua wins. I remember asking Billy, we were hosing up the screen house up on site, and Billy said, I think Tua would just be too much for him. And I it's very vague, but I sort of knew exactly what he was saying. But yeah, that's cool. The next one, Larry Holmes in his prime against Lennox Lewis in his prime. That one's a tough one.
That is a tough one. Lennox was big, and he had some ability. I think Larry went in there about 224, 225 normally, and Lewis was much bigger. I mean, early in his career, he was low 230s, but once he developed, he was 240, 245, and he could fight. I'm going to give the advantage to Larry Holmes because of his jab, and I know Lewis had a good jab too, but I think Larry actually wins the fight with that jab. Okay. And I wouldn't be surprised if he got hurt or even dropped, but he still gets up and he wins the fight. I mean, it's a tough one. Like I said, these different eras, because it's hard for me. Like a good example is Rocky Marciano, just because of his size. It's tough to beat these bigger guys. And and for me, he doesn't do it. I mean, if you threw Rocky Marciano against Lewis, I'd say Lewis is just going to beat him just because he's just so much bigger. Yeah. But I'm going to go with that Larry Holmes that fought Ken Norton, where he sits there, and I mean that last round was phenomenal. But I just think that jab, he probably would have out jabbed him, and got him a decision. Although I could see him getting dropped in that fight, but still coming out with a close decision win.
Yeah, the chins were a little bit on the opposite end of the spectrums, with Larry Holmes having quite a good chin, and Lennox's, it was not considered exactly the cast iron chin. But what was the height of Larry Holmes? I know Lennox is 6'5".
Larry was 6'3".
Okay, so he's got a couple inches on him.
Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah. That one's a tough one for me. I think I'd probably, just looking at the size, I don't know, I think I'd go with Lennox Lewis, but the way you break it down, yeah, it makes sense. The next one's got a fella here, Ray Mercer, Merciless Ray Mercer. Billy says Mercer's a bit of a throwback fighter. He's featured in most of these mystery matchups because you can throw him into any era, really, and it makes for a really compelling bout.
You can.
Yeah.
And I love Ray.
Yeah, and the first one is actually a guy that was in his era. And I wasn't really watching boxing at the time when Riddick Bowe and Ray Mercer were in their primes, but why didn't that one happen? I got no idea. And what do you think would have happened if it did?
Well, I'll give you a little background information. They both fought in the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, Korea, and I went and watched them both. I watched all the finals in that Olympics, and Bowe got stopped by Lewis in the super heavyweight finals, and Ray Mercer stopped the Korean guy in the heavyweight finals.
Yep.
So Bowe got a silver, Ray got a gold. Yeah, Bowe was naturally the bigger guy. I think if they fought as pros, in Bowe's prime, he was very talented. Very, very talented. And I know he didn't have a real long run, but I would have to favor him. The biggest thing about Ray is, I mean, he was durable. He was bull strong. Years ago, after the volcano erupted here in the Philippines, I ended up going to Las Vegas, and I was in the gym, and I met this kid from Indiana, young heavyweight, Jeff Bosno, I think his name was. Big kid. He was about 6'1" or 6'2", 230, 235. And he said he was training with Ray in Indiana at the time. And he sparred with him a few times. He said, this guy is just bull strong. I mean, you just could not move the guy. But I think Bowe's skills would end up winning that fight. I mean, it would be an entertaining fight. I don't think that Ray beats him.
And was there any talk of them two fighting back in the 90s? Was there ever?
I don't remember that. I just, yeah, it was one of those situations where actually, you know what? I think there might have been. I think Ray might have got upset by Jesse Ferguson, the ex-Navy fighter.
Okay.
And Ferguson ended up fighting Bowe instead of Ray Mercer, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
That I'd have to look that up. But now that I'm thinking about it, I think that they were actually supposed to fight, and then Ray went in there. He wasn't in top shape, and it's funny because there was an old guy at Subic, which is an hour away from where I live now, the old Subic Naval Base. His name was Coach Johnson, and I went down there on a temporary duty for a week one time, and I trained every day with this guy. And what a great guy, old school trainer. I mean, I remember, okay, I want you to work on the jab. They had like a Mike Tyson bag there with basically a speed bag that's filled with sand. And the first day, get on that bag and just throw jabs. And I'm like, okay, so we're throwing jabs. 8 rounds later, still throwing jabs. What's next, coach? Now, just 2 more rounds of that, and then you're done. That was it. And I tell you, I held my hands up like that, and my left hand was shaking like a leaf. My right hand was fine because I never used it. But he had me working that jab. And then after the training every day, we would go and sit on a park bench, and everybody be walking by. And he always said hello to the nice young ladies. Just a really nice guy. But he actually worked with Jesse Ferguson, who was in the Navy. And but Jesse had some ability. But I'm pretty sure that he pulled the upset against Ray Mercer, and I think Ray was supposed to fight Bowe next, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
I'd have to look that up.
Beautiful. And the next one is Merciless Ray Mercer versus Iron Mike Tyson. What do you? I'm going with Mercer on that one. What do you think?
You know what? I think that in Mike's prime, when he was young, I just think he's going to be too busy for Ray and too fast. I mean, at that point, he threw plenty of punches. If you see Mike later in his career, the big thing is he stops moving his head. Once he stops moving his head, he's a sit and duck on a pond. I mean, seriously, if you look at him, he's basically 6 foot tall. He's fighting guys that are 6'4", 6'5", with long reaches, and he starts getting picked off. But when he was in his early 20s, you got to remember, he's not like most fighters. He probably reached his prime in 22, maybe. It was very early in his career. But when he was doing that, I mean, his head movement and his speed and his combination punching inside was incredible. And I think that Ray would get into a bit of a, okay, I'll hit you and you hit me type of game with him. But I think that his flurries will end up winning that fight. Again, yeah. I don't think Mike Knox, Ray was tough. I'm never going to say anybody knocks him out. I know he got stopped by, who was it? One of the Klitschko's. I think the younger Klitschko, Vladimir, stopped him. But I was watching that fight, and I said, look, if he can get beyond the 8th round, Klitschko might run out of gas. And he was taking everything, and I think the referee in the corner finally stopped the fight. But he was getting hit with a lot of stuff. I think sometimes with Ray, he just didn't do enough. And I think that Mike's volume punching, when he does throw his punches, his speed is going to cause Ray problems because Ray wasn't the fastest guy in the world. But Ray's going to take it all, and at the end of the day, he's going to give him a high five and go, "Hey, that was fun. When do we do it again?"
Okay, the next one is one that Billy's thrown in here. Tommy Hearns against Tito Trinidad. I think that one he was meaning at 147. What do you think, Rick?
Well, let me give you a little background. Did you hear the news? I read a post today on Facebook from Bob Maravich saying that Troy Waters died. Did you hear that news?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. Well, Troy actually went to San Diego, California in the early 90s. I think it was 93. And he fought Felix Trinidad.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, he didn't. Felix fought Maurice Blocker on the undercard of Troy Waters versus Terry Norris. The main event was Troy Waters. What a fight that was. And absolutely, I think it only lasted 4 rounds, but Troy dropped Terry, had him in big trouble a few times. It was just a phenomenal 4-round fight. But Felix Trinidad was 19 years old. Maurice Blocker was the thin man, tall boxer from, I think, the Washington, D.C. area. Don King's fighter. Actually, they both were. And, I mean, I think he only had 19 fights. He had less than 20 fights. But he was like a 19-year-old Puerto Rican, and he rocked Blocker early. And I was sitting there ringside, and this guy next to me said, the first round he rocked him a few times. And he said, he goes, Blocker will win a unanimous decision, or I'll box him. And I said, this Puerto Rican is going to knock him out the next round. And he did. He stopped him in 2 rounds. Unbelievable performance. But him fighting, who do we have him lined up against? Tommy Hearns. And it's supposed to be, I just think Tommy is, if you watch a lot of Tito's fights, he gets dropped early, and then he comes back and wins.
Yeah.
I think Tommy might drop him and finish him.
Yeah.
It's really hard to any of these guys fighting Tommy Hearns at 147. I mean, it's hard to pick against Tommy at 147 pounds.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just so tall, so long. The power was incredible. He had boxing skills. Just really hard to pick against him because of the physical advantages. And this guy had some serious skills, not to mention that power. And I just think he beats Felix, and he may even stop him.
Yeah, I agree with that. So you're saying that 147, it's quite hard to pick against Hearns, but the next fight is at light heavyweight, and it's Hearns versus Roy Jones Jr. Now, that one's interesting. What do you think would happen there, Rick?
Well, Roy was a special fighter. I mean, in his prime, this guy was, if you look at his skill set, the whole package, he was definitely a one percenter in the history of boxing. I mean, that guy had some serious skills. He had that combination of unbelievable speed and power, where he could hit you with one punch and knock you out, and he had that blinding speed. Style was a little bit awkward, but I tell you, I don't see Tommy beating him at light heavyweight at 175 pounds. I mean,
very aggressive as well.
Definitely not the best Tommy Hearns. The best Tommy Hearns for me was 147. But because of it, a lot of, I mean, some had to do with his physical advantages, younger. But yeah, by the time he started going through the weight classes, yes, he did beat Virgil Hill at 175 pounds. I know Virgil had a few problems as far as physical problems, and maybe should have pulled out of the fight, but he couldn't because it was such a huge payday for him. But I'm not making any excuses because Tommy beat him. And but I just think that at 175 pounds, Tommy doesn't win that fight.
Yep, I agree with that one. Next one's another one from Billy Holyfield versus Shavers.
Ernie, the guy that could hit. Well, this guy was a huge puncher. You know, if somebody watches Burt Cooper versus Holyfield, and they watch that fight, they say, Josh Shavers would have knocked him out in 2 rounds. Yeah. But I just think that, you know, Evander he probably gets hurt. He might even get dropped, but he's one of those guys that you put him in any era, and he's going to be competitive with everybody. And some of these fights for me, some of the hardest ones here are the Holyfield matchups. Yeah. I really like Holyfield. But I actually think he'll beat, if they ever fought, I thought he would beat Ernie. Even though Ernie was a huge puncher, I think Evander was just one of those special guys, and I don't think that Ernie, in any era of fighting, Evander would have beat him.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And next, Holyfield versus Smokin' Joe.
That was a toughie. That when I did my list, I kind of was. I'm not saying it was easy to pick these guys, but it wasn't where I had to sit there for 20 minutes and think about it. But I ended up doing the 16 fights, and the two that I left off, this was one of them. I had to go back to it and say, okay, Holyfield versus my favorite heavyweight in the 70s, Smokin' Joe Frazier.
Yep.
I had a chance to meet him in Las Vegas years after he was done. I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna take the old school guy, and I'm gonna say one thing is that they're both about the same weight. When Evander fought at heavyweight, he was about 205, 206. Got a little bit older, and then he went up to about maybe 212, 215. But Smokin' Joe was he was low 200 in his prime. His relentlessness, where he keeps moving his head, and just keeps coming forward. I actually think that he beats Holyfield, and I'm not being biased because trust me, I love Evander Holyfield. I mean, he was one of my favorite heavyweights, one of my favorite fighters of all time. I say this: when we ruin the planet, it's gone, and some new civilization comes down and sees a shell of a planet with no people, just mangy dogs and cockroaches, and they see a statue of a boxer. I think that boxer statue should be Evander Holyfield with a shaved head.
Beautiful. Okay, the next one. Okay, Billy thinks Shavers stops Lennox Lewis. I haven't seen a hell of a lot of Shavers, so all I know is everyone says he's the hardest puncher in heavyweight history. maybe now they'll say Deontay Wilder is, but Shavers versus Lennox Lewis. What do you think, Rick?
That's a good analogy. If you look and see that Lewis got stopped twice, Oliver McCall and Hakeem Rockman. One of those fights, I'm going to give him a bit of a pass on because I believe it was in South Africa, and he'd been filming that movie Ocean's whatever. 10, 11, whatever it was, whichever one of those first ones were. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he was in great shape, and the altitude definitely affected him. But I can't remember which one knocked him out after that movie. But yeah, he got knocked out by two guys that weren't known to punch like Ernie Shavers. So this is another one where if they fight 3 times, I think Lennox wins 2 out of the 3. But I also say that, you know what, probably gets knocked out at least once.
Yep.
So it's one of those tough ones. Well, does he get knocked out? I could actually go with Billy on this one. He gets knocked out in the first fight. He comes back and wins the next 2.
Well, that's what he did. Yeah, he come back. He was good at coming back.
Yeah. So you know what? I'll agree with Billy on it. This was another close one because I'm thinking, you know what? He gets clipped. He could definitely get knocked out. I mean, he got knocked out by McCall. He got knocked out by Rockman, and why not Ernie Shavers? On a good day, I mean, Lennox Lewis was a much better heavyweight than Ernie Shavers as far as the overall package. He's got to be. I know people rate him much higher than Ernie in the overall ratings, but first fight, it's a 1-fight deal. I think maybe Ernie clips him and wins. But if they went beyond that, I definitely say that Lewis would win the rematch, and then if they had a trilogy, he would win the 3rd fight. Interesting.
The next fight is a couple of guys. It's another one Billy put in. He likes the guys from the black and white era. Bob Foster versus Ezzard Charles. What happens there, Rick?
Well, I'm going to go with the old analogy where the better big man beats the better little man. And Bob was Bruce McTavish, like my 3rd father. He loved Bob Foster. Used to go to the IBF conventions, and Bob would go to the conventions. I'm pretty sure Bob was a sheriff in Albuquerque, New Mexico. After his boxing career. I lived in Albuquerque for a few months. I was in the Air Force there. But Ezzard Charles was a hell of a fighter. I mean, and he was really good in an era that was really good. I mean, yeah, Rocky beat everybody, but a lot of those guys, you know, I don't know if these guys were quite in their prime when Rocky came along. But in that fight, I'd have to favor Ezzard Charles.
Okay. I'm not going to put a prediction in there. I don't know enough about both guys. Next fight, Holyfield Norton. What happens there?
It's another toughie. Out of all of them, I didn't write a winner down on that one. That's one where I'm sitting there. I mentioned that fight in San Diego with Troy Waters and Terry Norris. Mm-hmm. Ken Norton was from San Diego. He was in the Marine Corps. I think he actually said, I don't know if he was originally from San Diego, but I think he might have settled in the area. And he was at that fight at ringside. And I was there with a very good doctor friend of mine, Mark Reed. And Mark's memorabilia collection is maybe second to none. He's got an incredible memorabilia collection. He went up and he got an autograph from Ken Norton. At that time, Ken had a problem, a physical problem. He wasn't walking really well. He's still built really nice. Still looked like he went to the gym every day. But that's another toughie. I'm actually going to go, and as much as I love Evander, I'm going to go with the old school guy because, you know, and a lot of these I'm thinking size. Kenny was a natural. whatever he was, 220, 225. I'm not gonna. Well, if you look at Evander Holyfield, he was a bit of a manufactured heavyweight. I mean, he was a light heavyweight in the Olympics, which is 178 pounds, which says he probably never fights as a light heavyweight in the pros because he's actually got to lose 3 more pounds. So he kind of progressed into the cruiserweight division, which at that time was 190 pounds, which would have been perfect. You know, you go from 178 to 190, and then now cruiserweight's 200, and then but in his prime as a heavyweight, he was 206. He wasn't big, but he fought big guys and he fought them well. I mean, Bo. I remember that fight with Riddick Bowe in Vegas. Bo was, 235, I think. He was a big guy, maybe a little bit heavier, and Holyfield hung in there with him. But just, I'm gonna give a slight advantage to Ken Norton. A lot of people think Norton beat Ali twice, and maybe even 3 times. He won the first fight. He broke his jaw in the first fight, and I believe that was in San Diego. He lost the next 2. Very controversial. Could have gone either way. A lot of boxing people said he won at least one of those 2. So, and I know it's, you're not supposed to really compare different fighters, but he fought some serious heavyweights, and Evander wasn't a huge puncher. If you look at who gave Ken Norton problems, it was George Foreman. That foot in the bucket style that he had, where he dragged that back foot and he walked into the firing range. George was a big, powerful heavyweight, and he got in. I think one fight went 2 rounds, 1 or 2 rounds, and the other fight maybe went 5 rounds. Or he didn't last very long in either fight, or maybe it was 1 and 2. But he got annihilated twice by George Foreman. But Holyfield didn't have that type of power, and I'm going to give a slight advantage to Ken Norton.
Yeah, beautiful. Next one, Ray Mercer against Rocky Marciano. The size is going to be a big thing in this fight, but what do you think happens, Rick?
That was another tough one, and like I said, you put Rocky on this list. Ray was going in there. Ray could balloon up and he could get heavy, but probably his best weight might have been in the, I don't know, maybe just over 210, 212, 214, somewhere in there where he's super fit, because he wasn't really big. Ray wasn't a 6'3" or 6'4" heavyweight, and like I said, in the Olympics when I saw him, he fought at 201, so he's not a huge guy, and Rocky fought at 187 pounds.
Yeah,
and he was a huge puncher, but I don't think he gets Ray out of there. A fit Ray Mercer, I think he handles everything that Rocky's got, and it's tough because the size advantage tells me, Ray wasn't the greatest fighter out of these guys. I mean, he's on this list a lot, and I think a lot of the reason is because he would provide all these legends with great fights. Not so much that you sit there, if you look at your list, and a lot of them are heavyweights, you'd say, well, Ray's not in the top 5.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at him, he's definitely not in the top 5. But now you look at his name and you go, wow, he might have more matchups than anybody on the list. I didn't break down how many times everybody's fighting on the list, but he's up there near the top. You know what? I'm going to say that Rocky keeps his unbeaten streak and he actually beats Ray, but it's one of those things that for me it's not a fair comparison. It'd almost be like saying Tommy Hearns won the cruiserweight title. How do you think he'd go against the cruiserweight version of Evander Holyfield? Not really fair to say that. Although you could actually say Manny Pacquiao won the flyweight title, how do you think he would go against these welterweights? And you could actually throw that in there. So I'm not saying it's as bad as putting Hearns at 190 against Evander Holyfield at 190, but the size does matter, and it's a tough one to call. Some of these fights a lot of these fights that I think of Ray, I think of them. I mean, a good example is the Tommy Morrison. I mean, he was getting his butt beat, and any other heavyweight probably is getting knocked out, or almost any heavyweight would have been done. He was getting beat so bad, and then boom, he turned it around, and the next thing you know, it was over. And I think if you talk to Ray, he'll tell you. You say, look, out of all the guys you fought in the amateurs and the pros, who's the hardest hitter? I'm pretty sure. I think I heard him say that. Oh, Tommy Morrison, that left off from hell was, yeah, he was a huge puncher, but he took it all. And I could see Rocky. I mean, if you watch some of his old videos where he's actually just, it's poor form. Instead of letting the punches go, he's bow and arrowing it. He's bringing it back, and he's firing. And Ray wasn't the fastest guy in the world. Didn't have the greatest, reactions. So he probably hits him with a few of them, but that's a tough one just because of the size difference. But I'm gonna go with Rocky. He just found a way to win every time.
Yeah, beautiful. I think if you're gonna put a mythical matchup with heavyweights pre-1950, you probably got to put him in there with a cruiserweight. A modern cruiserweight, if anything.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, really fair, because you start throwing Rocky in there with Lennox Lewis, even that Muhammad Ali, that thing that they did back in the 70s where they did that fantasy fight and they hooked them up to these little wires and stuff, and actually talked to Lou Duva. Ali kept messing with Rocky Marciano, and Rocky gave him a couple of rib stickers in that thing. He actually hit him in the ribs a bit. They're supposed to be just kind of pulling their punches, and I guess they're filming it and they're figuring out by the computer who would win. Muhammad Ali doesn't lose to Rocky Marciano in a fight. He's just too big, too talented. Rocky was a heavyweight of the 50s, where these guys were, 185 to 195 pounds. When Liston came along in the 60s, he was late 50s. He was a little bit bigger, but most of these guys were, they're walking around at 185 to 195. So it's tough to throw him in there. Even Riddick Bowe at I think he was 245 when he was fighting 235, 245. He would. These guys would have gave Rocky Marciano all kinds of problems in their prime.
Yeah, and I think I'd go with Mercer for that one. The next one is another Mercer fight. Two bulls in the paddock, Mercer and Liston. What do you think happens there, Rick?
Now, Sonny's a bigger version. Rocky was 187. I don't remember what Sonny was, but Sonny was bigger. I think these guys kind of fight the same. I think they both use their jabs. I think it's a very, very good fight, but it's another one where Ray never really made it to the very top. I think he won the WBO world title when he beat Tommy Morrison. So he did win one of the big four. But he was always that guy that just never made it to the real top, and Sonny did. And Sonny fought good guys, and I tell you, he was hurting people. And I'm not saying that he's going to hurt Ray, because I just don't think a top Ray gets hurt by anybody in the history of boxing. I just think he was that strong. He just, man, you could hit him all day and walk out of there with 4 broken knuckles, and he'd sit there and laugh at you. But I'm gonna give the edge to the older guy. I'm gonna say that Liston probably beats him in a decision, a close decision. But I say Sonny beats him.
Beautiful. With that one, it's hard for me to say. I've only really seen Liston with his Muhammad Ali fights and a few outside of that. It's a tough one for me to go with. But the next one, we've got Mercer again, but with Ron Lyle, and the Ron Lyle that faced George Foreman back in the day. How does he fare up against Merciless?
I tell you, when I came overseas in the military back in the mid '80s, the Armed Forces Network always had a TV station where you got to watch. There was only a few channels. It was maybe 3 or 4 channels, and they showed this fight all the time. By the time I got to here, I know I saw it in Korea a few times, and I saw it here many times. That fight, I'd seen that fight more than any fight I'd ever seen, because it was like the only one they had. They just constantly showed that fight. Ron was a big, tough heavyweight from. Pretty sure he was from Denver. Then he was working security in Las Vegas after his career. But this one, I'm actually going to go. I know I don't think I picked Ray Alvey, but I'm actually going to give this one to Ray, because Ron he didn't make it to the top, and real tough fighter. Yeah, George had a great chin, but the night that he fought Ron, he was getting dropped and hurt, and there could have been some factors in there. First of all, I don't know where they fought. I mean, I'm not going to say they fought. If they fought in Denver, then I could see, because that city's a mile above sea level. So, but I don't think they did. I'd have to look up the location. But George, out of his whole career, I mean, yeah, I know Ali dropped him and stopped him, but he looked like he had a great chin, and even late in his career. I mean, these guys just bouncing stuff off him, and he's taking them like he's taking them like they're nothing. But again, Ray, I just don't see him getting stopped. And I see him having a little bit more steam than Ron. I think Ron kind of peters out in this fight and possibly gets stopped.
You heard about the bit of the backstory with Ron Lyle when he was in prison?
I did read something about that years ago. I can't remember the details.
Yeah, he got stabbed in prison and he actually died on the operating table. They signed his death warrant, or his death certificate, sorry. And then the next shift doctor came on and he thought, I'll have a crack, and they brought him back. His death certificate was actually signed, so yeah, he was a bit of a savage, that guy. That's about it. That's all. Sorry.
He was very tough.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, well, that's all of our mythical matchups for this session. You got anything else happening, Rick? Anything else in your world?
No. There was something else boxing wise that I had earlier when we started the list, but I forgot already. Yeah, I just hope that things get back to semi-normal soon. I hope there's not a second wave in this thing. And I mean, you go back 100 years and you look at the Spanish flu. I mean, it went basically from 1918 to 1920, and there was 3 waves. The second wave was the worst. So because this is actually ruining world economies.
Oh yeah.
I started looking at world economies back in August, and I got real scared real fast, especially with the U.S. economy. Yeah, this was with a pinprick that kind of blew up a bad system. Credits kind of ruined the world as far as economies goes, and this has really hurt it. And I think it's going to actually change the world for many, many years.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money there. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for that, Rick. Thanks for listening, everyone. You've been watching the Ring General Boxing Podcast with myself, George Zaka, and we're joined in the Philippines by Rick Staley, former trainer of Manny Pacquiao. Thanks for watching. Okay, Rick.
Hey, thanks, George.